Welcome to a list of mountains almost impossible to reach. They are so remote that many of them have barely been seen up close, let alone climbed. Every peak here is unique, either because of extreme remoteness, brutal terrain, or the sheer difficulty of even getting near them. This entire list was compiled through extensive Google Earth research and deep investigation into some of the most inaccessible places on the planet. The last mountain on this list might be the most remote peak in all of North America. Number 7 is supposedly the birthplace of a certain supreme leader. Number 2 was literally found by scanning Google Earth. Nobody knew it existed until a scientist zoomed in on a mysterious patch of green. But let's start with number 1, a mountain that might be the most isolated peak anywhere on Earth. A perfect cone hidden deep in the Amazon, visible from hundreds of kilometers away, yet protected by uncontacted tribes and impenetrable rainforest. This is Cerro el Cono, an almost perfect pyramid rising out of the jungle in eastern Peru. It's only about 700 meters tall, but it stands hundreds of meters above an otherwise flat ocean of trees, so it looks completely alien. Cerro el Cono sits inside Sierra del Divisor National Park, one of the most remote regions in the entire Amazon, and it's the only real mountain chain in the lower Amazon basin. Getting anywhere near this place is already a challenge for researchers, let alone climbers. But the real reason this mountain made the list is simple. You're not allowed to go there. The area overlaps with territories of uncontacted indigenous groups, and Peru treats this region as highly protected. That means you need special permissions, coordination with indigenous organizations, and usually a full-scale expedition just to get into the park legally. Even if you somehow made it that far, the mountain itself has no trails, no mapped routes, and no documented ascents. The slopes are steep, overgrown, and unstable. Reports from survey teams say the ground is so dense and uneven that many attempts to reach the upper flank simply turn back. Peakbagger even lists Cerro el Cono as provisional, meaning nobody has officially logged a climb. And yet, despite all that, this mountain has an almost mythical presence. On clear days, people say you can see its silhouette from the foothills of the Andes. Local communities treat it as a sacred apu, a kind of mountain spirit. And because of its perfect shape, the internet has filled with theories claiming it might be some kind of lost pyramid. Geologists don't buy that. It's almost certainly volcanic or carved by erosion. But that hasn't stopped the legends. Cerro el Cono was practically unknown to science until just a couple decades ago. It barely appeared in maps. Only conservationists and anthropologists working in the region started bringing attention to it when the national park was created. For all those reasons, Cerro el Cono might be the most isolated and inaccessible mountain in the entire Amazon, and maybe one of the most mysterious-looking mountains anywhere on Earth. From the deep jungle of Peru, we move across the world to Africa, where in 2005 scientists unexpectedly spotted a strange green patch on satellite images. It turned out to be a hidden rainforest on the slopes of a mountain, a place that soon became known as Google Forest. Our next mountain takes us to northern Mozambique, to a place that science somehow completely missed until the 2000s. This is Mount Mabu, an Inselberg rising to about 1,700 meters, or 5,577 feet, covered by one of the largest untouched mid-altitude rainforests in all of southern Africa. And here's what makes it so interesting. Until 2005, almost nobody in the outside world even knew this rainforest existed. Scientists only noticed it after spotting a massive, unexplained block of deep green on Google Earth. That discovery earned it the nickname Google Forest. When researchers finally visited in 2005 and 2008, they realized they had stumbled into a true lost world. Teams from the Mulanje Mountain Conservation Trust, several ornithologists, and later the Kew Royal Botanic Gardens found a treasure trove of biodiversity, including brand new species of chameleons, butterflies, birds, and plants. It quickly became one of the best examples of how satellite imagery can uncover real-world secrets. The mountain was always known to nearby communities, but scientifically it was a blank spot. No research, no documentation, no previous biological surveys. It was simply too remote, too rugged, and too inconvenient to reach. And that's what makes it hard to access even today. Getting there means long drives on rough dirt tracks into rural Zambezia, reaching remote villages, and then climbing steep forested slopes with nothing but local footpaths. Most teams had to be entirely self-sufficient and rely on local guides. Mount Mabu might not be technically difficult to climb, but as a discovery, and as a hidden world sitting in plain sight, it's one of the most remarkable mountains on this entire list. And if finding a hidden rainforest by accident wasn't strange enough, the next mountain takes this idea even further. In the same region of Mozambique, scientists later spotted another mysterious patch of green on Google Earth. But this time, the forest was sitting on top of a mountain completely surrounded by vertical cliffs, a place so isolated that almost nobody had ever been up there. This is Mount Lico, rising to about 1,100 meters or 3,609 feet. But the height isn't what makes it special. It's what's on top. It was identified on Google Earth by the same scientist who found Mabu, Julian Bayliss, as another unexplained patch of green, this time on top of a rock tower. Unlike Mabu's wide forest, the summit of Mount Lico is a flat, circular plateau surrounded on all sides by near-vertical rock walls up to 700 meters high. Because of these cliffs, the forest on top was practically impossible to reach. Even local communities living around the mountain said they had never been up there, and there were no paths or traditions of anyone visiting the summit. Scientists first noticed the forest around 2012 while scanning satellite imagery. From above, it looked like a perfect green disk sitting on top of a rock tower, something that shouldn't exist in such isolation. So in 2018, a team of about 28 climbers and researchers launched an expedition to finally reach the top. To access the plateau, they had to climb a 125-meter vertical face using fixed lines, hauling ropes, equipment, and eventually the scientists themselves onto the summit. And what they found was remarkable. New or rare species, untouched habitat, and even ancient pottery fragments, suggesting that a small group of people found a way up centuries ago, using a technique that has been completely lost. Lico is often described as one of the most isolated forests in Africa, protected naturally for centuries by the sheer walls surrounding it. It might not be tall, but it's easily one of the most inaccessible and mysterious mountains on the continent. From the isolated Inselbergs of Mozambique, we now head into one of the harshest environments on Earth, the Central Sahara. Here, the next mountain rises thousands of meters above the desert, inside a region so remote and politically sensitive that even reaching its base can take days of travel across empty sand. This is Emi Koussi, a massive shield volcano rising to 3,415 meters or 11,204 feet, making it the highest peak in the entire Sahara. What makes Emi Koussi so difficult to reach isn't the climb itself, but everything around it. The mountain sits deep inside the Tibesti Mountains of northern Chad, one of the most remote and politically sensitive regions in the desert. To get there, you need multi-day 4x4 crossings over completely empty terrain, carrying your own fuel, water, and supplies. And because the area overlaps tribal lands and has a long history of instability, travel often requires permits, local escorts, or both. Once you finally reach the massif, the scale of the volcano becomes obvious. The summit area is enormous, a 60 to 70 kilometer wide volcanic complex, with a giant outer caldera about 15 kilometers across. Historical accounts even mention Tibu people living inside the summit caldera and carving artificial caves into the rock. Despite its size, Emi Koussi is surprisingly poorly studied. Its last eruption is unknown, likely in the Holocene, meaning sometime within the last 11,700 years, but with no documented historical activity. The remoteness of the Tibesti Range has limited both geological research and mountaineering. Emi Koussi might not be technically extreme, but as a remote objective, it's one of the most inaccessible mountains on the planet, and one of the most isolated major volcanic summits in human history. Leaving the Sahara behind, we now move far out into the South Atlantic. The next mountain rises from one of the most remote inhabited islands on Earth, a place with no airport, no quick way in or out, and a community that once had to evacuate after the volcano erupted beneath their feet. This is Queen Mary's Peak, a stratovolcano reaching 2,062 meters or 6,765 feet, standing above the tiny island of Tristan da Cunha in the South Atlantic. What makes this mountain so hard to reach is simply getting there. Tristan da Cunha has no airport, and the only way to reach the island is by ship from Cape Town. There are usually around 9 or 10 sailings per year, each one taking 6 to 7 days across open ocean. Even when you arrive, climbing the peak depends entirely on local guides, small weather windows, and whether the island community has time to take visitors up. The mountain itself is spectacular. The summit holds a heart-shaped crater lake, a feature that has become famous in photos and travel writing. But the most dramatic moment in its history happened on October 10, 1961, when a flank eruption forced the entire population of about 260 people to evacuate. Islanders were moved to nearby Nightingale Island, then shipped to Cape Town and eventually to England, where they lived for nearly 2 years before choosing to return home. It's a rare example of a whole community temporarily abandoning its home, then deciding that life in extreme isolation was still worth coming back to. Climbing Queen Mary's Peak isn't technically difficult, but the real challenge is everything before the climb: committing to the long sea voyage, landing on one of the smallest settlements on Earth, and waiting for the right moment to attempt the peak. From the South Atlantic, we head deep into northeastern Siberia. The next mountain sits in one of the coldest inhabited regions on Earth, a place where winter temperatures can drop below -50, and the nearest road is hundreds of kilometers away. This is Gora Pobeda, the highest peak of the Chersky Range, rising to 3,003 meters, or about 9,852 feet. And despite its height, it's considered one of the harshest and most remote climbs in the entire Northern Hemisphere. Reaching it is the first major challenge. The nearest road is said to be over 350 kilometers, or about 217 miles away, and the closest helicopter base is roughly 1,300 kilometers, or more than 800 miles from the area. The wider region includes Omiakon, famous as the coldest permanently inhabited settlement on Earth. In winter, temperatures here can drop below -50 degrees Celsius, which is about -58 degrees Fahrenheit. Gora Pobeda was first climbed in 1966 by a Yakutsk mountaineering team. One of the most notable expeditions happened in 2018 when Simone Moro and Tamara Lunger completed the first winter ascent. They described conditions so brutal that their boots froze solid overnight, winds tore at their tents, and the cold made every piece of equipment difficult to use. There are no shelters, no infrastructure, and no support, just vast Arctic wilderness. From the frozen mountains of Siberia, we move to one of the most politically sensitive peaks in the world. The next mountain sits right on the border of a closed-off nation, tied to national mythology, state propaganda, and one of the largest volcanic eruptions of the last 2,000 years. Our next mountain takes us to the border between China and North Korea. This is Mount Paektu, rising to 2,744 meters, or 9,003 feet, and forming a huge caldera filled by a deep, striking blue lake known as Heaven Lake. What makes Paektu difficult to reach isn't physical remoteness, it's the politics around it. We're talking about the North Korean side, which is far more restrictive, with access limited to approved state-run tours that tie the mountain directly into political messaging and historical symbolism. It is effectively impossible to reach for Western visitors. Paektu's cultural importance is enormous. In Korean mythology, this mountain is the birthplace of Dangun, the legendary founder of the First Korean Kingdom. In modern North Korean propaganda, it's also claimed as the birthplace of Kim Jong-il, and it's used as a backdrop for major political events, with Kim Jong-un visiting the crater during key moments in his leadership. Geologically, the mountain is just as dramatic. Around the year 946 CE, Paektu produced the Millennium Eruption, one of the largest volcanic eruptions of the last 2,000 years. Ash from this event spread across Korea, China, and even reached Japan. Reaching the summit rim today depends entirely on which side you're on. The Chinese side is accessible but tightly controlled, with regulated tourism and limited freedom to explore. But we are talking about the North Korean side, which is effectively impossible to access. From one of the most politically restricted mountains on Earth, we now travel to one of the most geographically remote. The next peak stands alone on an uninhabited island off the coast of Antarctica, a massive volcano that has never been climbed by anyone. This is Mount Siple, a completely ice-covered shield volcano on Siple Island, rising to 3,162 meters, or 10,374 feet. It sits on an uninhabited island, separated from the Antarctic mainland by the Getz ice shelf, and even by Antarctic standards, almost no one ever goes there. Mount Siple is often listed as unclimbed, and many mountaineering databases treat it as one of the most prominent unclimbed peaks on the planet. There are no detailed topographic maps, only rough sketch mapping and satellite images, meaning the true shape of the mountain beneath all that ice is still mostly unknown. Mount Siple is so massive and isolated that it holds the third greatest topographic prominence in all of Antarctica. Even among scientists, Siple is barely studied. Some cruises have passed near the island, and a handful of teams may have stepped on its coast, but there is no confirmed ascent, and getting here would be harder than climbing it. You'd need an ice-strengthened research vessel operating in one of the most remote stretches of the Amundsen or Bellingshausen Sea. From a coastal landing, an expedition would face crevassed glacier slopes, harsh Antarctic storms, and zero rescue infrastructure. Every route would be pure guesswork on an ice-buried volcano. And from this untouched Antarctic giant, we head north, far north, to a mountain that's even more mysterious in one specific way. A peak so prominent and so isolated on the landscape that it should have been a trophy summit decades ago, yet its true high point remains untouched. Our next destination is the Sauyr Range on the Kazakhstan-China border, a remote, dry, and sparsely populated part of Central Asia that almost nobody ever travels to. Sauyr Zhotasy rises to 3,840 meters, or 12,598 feet, with over 10,000 feet of prominence. That makes it one of the most dominant mountains in the entire region, and one of the most prominent unclimbed peaks on Earth. What makes this mountain so strange is that, despite its size and how impressive it looks, the true summit has no confirmed ascent. Not one. Climbers have gotten close, though. In 2017 and 2018, alpinist Ed Hannem and his partners reached an eastern sub-summit, dealing with border checks, limited maps, tricky glaciers, and the complete lack of infrastructure in the Sauyr Range. But they stopped short of the highest point, and so far, nobody else has claimed it. The main reason is simple. Sauyr Zhotasy sits directly on an international border, and both sides enforce strict access. Getting permission to even approach the mountain can be harder than the climb itself. For a mountain this big, this prominent, and this dramatic, it's extremely rare to find one that remains truly unclimbed. Now we leave Central Asia and head far into the Arctic, to a place with no roads, no towns, and no easy way in or out. Our final mountain sits deep inside one of the most remote wilderness areas in all of North America, and for decades, climbers weren't even sure which peak here was the tallest. This is Mount Isto, the highest peak in the Brooks Range, rising to 2,736 meters, or 8,976 feet. What makes Mount Isto special isn't extreme height or technical difficulty, it's the setting. The Brooks Range cuts across the top of Alaska like a frozen spine, and its eastern half, where Isto stands, is completely roadless. The only practical way in is by bush plane, landing on a gravel bar somewhere inside the Arctic National Wildlife Refuge, one of the most remote protected areas in the United States. Once you're dropped off, you're on your own. There's no rescue infrastructure, no shelters, and no guarantees about weather, just you, the tundra, and whatever is out there. For decades, even the identity of the tallest peak in the Arctic was a mystery. Older maps listed Mount Chamberlain as the high point, while some climbers argued for Hubley or Isto. The region was simply too vast and poorly surveyed. That changed between 2014 and 2015, when researcher Matt Nolan flew over the range with a homemade airborne mapping system called FODAR. His data completely reshaped the maps. Mount Isto, not Chamberlain, is the true highest peak of the Brooks Range. Guidebooks and online databases had to be rewritten. The mountain itself rises cleanly above the surrounding valleys. It's mostly glacier, talus, and long tundra approaches, but the remoteness is what defines it. Climbers face river crossings, days of backpacking with no trails, grizzly territory, and sudden Arctic weather that can shut everything down. But once you're there, the feeling must be unlike anywhere else in North America. Total silence, enormous distances, and a landscape that hasn't changed in thousands of years. Mount Isto may not be the highest mountain in the world, but in terms of isolation, commitment, and pure wilderness, its peak is one of the most remote places you can possibly stand on. It's also interesting how much of this list exists because of modern tools. A scientist zooming into a random green patch on Google Earth uncovered one of Africa's last unexplored forests. Precise aerial mapping revealed Alaska's true Arctic high point. Even the jungles of Peru kept a pyramid-shaped mountain hidden until recently. Exploration hasn't ended, it's just moved to a new starting point, the satellite map on your screen. If you enjoyed this one, check out my other stuff about mountains. Also consider subscribing, it really helps me grow. Thanks for watching.